Um, this is informational, or everything today. There's nothing actionable, but we're going to we'll get started, and then I'm going to turn the reins over to Vice Chair Davis. But I'm going to call this meeting to order. I'm going to read the statement about electronic meeting as authorized by Utah Code 52-4-207. This meeting is being held electronically without an anchor location to reduce the risk to health and safety from COVID-19 by limiting in-person participation. Now we're going to probably have board members join, but I'll do a quick roll call here. Vice Chair Belknap?
Yes.
Member Booth?
Yes.
Member Cannon?
Here.
Member Klein?
Here.
Vice Chair Davis?
Here.
Member Earl?
Here.
Member Hanson? Member Hanson? We'll watch for him. Member Hart?
Here.
Member Hutchings?
Here.
Member Hymas? Member Hymas? Member Lear? Member Lear? Member Moss?
Here.
Member Norton?
Here.
Member Straight?
Here.
And Chair Huntsman's present. Does anyone have a birthday today? No. Are we sure?
It's my
Okay.
mother's birthday.
All right. Well, that was so much fun yesterday. Thank you, Member Booth, and thank you, Vice Chair Belknap, for having a birthday yesterday. I hope it was awesome. I'm going to turn the reins over to Vice Chair Davis.
Great, thank you, Chair Huntsman. Welcome, everybody. We're going to get right into our USDB board meeting first, and we're going to hear from Carl Empey, Finance Director, on our first agenda item.
Good afternoon, Madam Vice Chairs, Mr. Chair, and board members. The financial report that we're presenting today is for the 5 months that ended November 30th. We are financially solvent and off to a good start for the fiscal year. Our transfers from the state and the state office of education, I'm just going to round up, total 21.6 million. Our expenditures were 17.4 million. So we've got a surplus of inflows greater than our expenses of approximately $4.2 million. The number of students that we've served as of the end of November is 2,588. Our balance in our land grant trust fund is $880,447. Our balance in our donated fund is $272,987. And our balance in our education foundation is $1,227,979. And those are the numbers on the financial report. The next report is the budget status report that gives all the salient detail to support the numbers that are on the financial report. The next report is our donated fund summary that shows each one of our donated accounts, showing in aggregate our $272,987. And then the last report is our enrichment fund projects. Of the total of $1,526,000 of projects that were approved by the board and recommended by the advisory council, we have spent $428,193, giving us a balance of just over almost $1.1 million to spend in the next 7 fiscal months. So I'd be happy to entertain any questions Madam Vice Chair, that you or the board members may have.
Thank you, Vice Chair Belknap.
Thank you, Carl. I have a question about the room rentals. I'm just curious as to what kind of rooms are people renting? And are you ever renting out your gyms or anything like that?
We actually have a choral group that is reserving the auditorium over at the JMS campus on 33rd South for their practices. And so we're getting rental income from that. Previous years, we had Disney making one of their Disney shows that used our gym, but we haven't had that for the last year and a half. So it's just the Madeline Choral Group that is reserving and renting our buildings over at JMS.
Well, you're famous on Disney, I guess.
Yeah, that
Disney.
was really fun to have them film over here at the new OEC building and over at JMS.
Disney Plus is all the rage. Board Member Norton. You're muted. You're muted, Kristen.
Okay. I had a question about the classroom supplies for educators. I wondered if the educators receive the state stipend, and if this is reflecting that, or if this is in addition to that.
This is the classroom money from the state that your office transfers over to us. As soon as we receive it, we distribute that out via the class wallet system out to our educators, so they've got money to purchase their supplies.
Great.
Hopefully that answers
Thank
your
you.
question. You're welcome.
Sure does.
Thank you. And thank you, Director Empey. Since we see no other hands and we have to end at 1:30 today, we're going to move over to Superintendent Coleman if you're finished with your presentation.
I am, thank you.
Thank you. Superintendent Coleman has the next two agenda items.
Thank you. Okay, so the next agenda item is, looks like a repeat from a couple months ago or last month, but after we had the board approve our special ed manual that every LEA has to approve now, it's quite extensive. It's like 100 pages. Your staff there at USBE wanted us to make some additional changes. And so going back and forth with them, we think we got it right. And so it's just here for approval again. If we had a consent agenda, it would be on it, but this is the only item like that today.
So we have this listed as an information item, not as an action item. Did we miss that somehow?
Maybe, or maybe we just wanted to show it to you so that you can see the changes are minor and technical, but anyway,
Okay.
we can, I'm sorry, I should have probably had that as a business item, but
That's okay. If it's not time sensitive, perhaps we could bring it back again next month and put it on as an action item.
sure, that would be fine. This is what we're using moving forward, so
Okay.
approving it next time would be fine.
Super. Thank you. Then should we move into the superintendent's report?
Okay, this is where we have the most stuff today for you. First item I thought I would let you know about is very somber, actually. Last weekend, one of our teachers passed away. It was a teacher of the deaf in our Ogden deaf school, and she was wonderful. She's been here for many years, and she was sick and went to the hospital and did not go home afterwards. She passed away while she was there. We don't know much more than that, but her funeral will be tomorrow, and I will be attending, as will Superintendent Tanner, I believe. And anyway, she was just great, and it's a tremendous loss to us. She was a trooper the whole time. She had the best attitude, and her name was Melanie Wilding Garcia, and she just was so great for the students that she taught. And was it second grade, Michelle, that she taught?
No, secondary.
Oh, secondary.
And she's had, I've just said people who worry about COVID, it really wasn't related to COVID, just so you know, she's had health concerns for
Yeah.
quite some time.
Yeah. Anyway, we wanted to acknowledge her in the board meeting and just mention how awesome she is. And in our Friday letter, we have a section with her and a little video that was made. So you can see that. The business side of this unfortunate situation is that we now had an opening. And so we moved another teacher up there from our Salt Lake campus because it's closer to home. And the opening has been filled with Michelle Tanner's executive assistant, who has been through all the classes and is ready. And she was planning on going into teaching after this school year anyway. And so she gets to go in a little bit early, and she's actually going to be awesome. It's Sherry Ramirez, and she's fantastic. So we're grateful that we had her, but that leaves superintendent without an assistant. And fortunately, Michelle doesn't need an assistant, so we're not going to fill that position. Just kidding. We're shopping around for people now, and hopefully we'll get someone else as good as Sherry has been. So that's a staffing update for you. Other great news on the flip side of that, Susan Thomas shared with us the totals for our media coverage in 2021. We got that in. We had 28,500,000 unique viewers and readers throughout the year. Our publicity value for that was $646,000. And it seems really high, but I'm just glad we're still getting attention for USDB. I know you're all aware of it, but I see it every day, how hard Susan and Todd work to create good media and get things out there. We think that's probably one of the best ways that we can get the word to people in the state who may not know that they have resources at their disposal if they have children who are deaf or blind or visually impaired or hard of hearing or deafblind. But anyway, it's good to be able to quantify that and put a number on it. So I thought I would share that with you. Another item, as board members of the State Board of Education, you should all get a copy of the standard, the education standard, which is a publication of NASB and the National Association of State Boards of Education. And they did an article this month where they interviewed me and a superintendent from another school for the deaf and the blind in the country. And that's, so that's in there. You might want to look for it. I don't think it reads as well as if it was written and typed because it was a verbal interview, but actually it came out pretty good. And they've asked me if I would sit on a panel for a webinar that they're going to do in February as well. So that's nice. I love NASB. When I was a board member, like one of you, I was on the NASB board, and I got to meet a lot of great state board members across the country. And so it's fun to interact with them again. It's a great organization, I think.
Superintendent, are you okay if we entertain some questions at this point?
Anytime, yes.
Okay, thanks. We just got out of committee. Board Member Lear.
And I was just going to say to Joel that Janet already did sung your praises, and know that you've got a fan in Janet. And
oh, that's great.
So you're not on your own in terms of telling us about that. But thank you.
Cool. Well, I'm pretty sure that's how they found me, because Janet called me and said, they might call you. I recommended your name. They might interview you. And so Janet and I have a secret little alliance because we both served on the board together.
Mutual Admiration Society. She spoke well. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you very much. Okay, facilities update. The Mill Creek portable has been set. I went and walked through it the other day, a couple days ago this week. It's there, but we're just waiting for utilities to be hooked up, and we're going to actually move the furnishings in before the utilities are done. So we hope that sometime in the next month it'll be ready. Utility companies are backed up, as you can imagine, but it's freezing cold, so we can't operate without utilities. St. George portable. The demolition has been completed inside with all of the mold and other things mitigated. We signed a contract to rebuild the inside, and so that's moving forward. The question I have for the board, and I don't know how you want to proceed with this, because it was a free portable and it was given to us by the state, we did not anticipate the cost being over the $100,000 threshold. But as we've had problems here and there, moving it was alone like 85,000. And we thought some utility hookups once we get there and we're golden, but this thing is going to cost as much as a new portable when we're done. And so the costs have crept up, and we've pretty much paid for everything to this point. But I just wanted the board to be aware that we did not bring any approval to you for that much expenditures. And so it's probably going to be about a $450,000 project when we're all done. The same price that we paid for the Mill Creek portable that was funded by the legislature. Fortunately, we have the carry forward money each year, and all this did is take our C priorities. We can still do the A's and B's, and C's are not urgent at all. So we shifted all that money into this project, which is obviously an A priority. And so financially we're good, but I just wanted to let the board, in a spirit of transparency, let you know these costs went up. And if you'd like to take a vote on that retroactively, or maybe we can just provide the breakdown for you in our next meeting, just let me know and we'd be happy to do whatever you want.
So I think seeing no hands and input at the time, I think what we'll do, Superintendent, is, if it's okay with you, is can you provide that information, and then we'll have an executive committee will determine how it goes on the agenda, if it's going to go on as an action item or a, and then if board members, if you have input on that, you can let Chair Huntsman know ahead of time before it's assigned.
Great, thank you.
Okay to you?
Probably the last time we accept anything free from the state.
Yeah, I was just thinking it's probably a good lesson, and when wonderful, well-meaning people offer in the future, it might be lessons learned.
Well, and we have been desperate for a facility down there, of course, in Washington County. And so if we did it again, if we had it to do over, I should say, we probably would have requested a building, but it wouldn't have been as much work for us as this has been, because we've just piecemealed this and hauled it down there and everything. So anyway, we'll get that to you as board leadership for sure. The next item, educator licensing. I always try to report on that. And Utah State University just announced that they are discontinuing their deaf education program for ASL. They're still producing teachers that are teachers of the deaf for listening and spoken language. But that was the only program left in the state, and for ASL teachers, which of course is our biggest need and hardest to fill. So we're working with other colleges, universities in the state still, the deans of education, and I will keep you updated. Superintendent Tanner is meeting in person with college presidents and deans of education, and there is a good deaf studies program at UVU, which is on the Wasatch Front. That's a good location. So we're hopeful that something will break there, especially now that there's no one else offering it in the state. It seems like we're hoping to get some traction there. But that was the only deaf education program approved by the board for a teacher prep program for ASL at this point also. Okay, the next item I have, there was a request from our senior staff to, now that we've gone to Fridays and kind of virtual with the board, if maybe a couple times a year or quarterly, we could still come in and see you in person and look at your smiling faces. Hopefully they're smiling when we come in. But if you could maybe just keep that, thought in the back of your minds, we really would like to see you once in a while in person if it's possible, and not always be virtual on Fridays. Or actually, we don't care what day it is, but virtual. The next item is, and I think this is my last item, unless Michelle and Susan have anything to add. It's the COVID update for USDB and how it's affecting us. We have had about 30 staff test positive since January 1st. Probably the lion's share of those in the last week and a half, of course. Not well with our campus, our kids on our campus, probably about the same numbers, even though we have more kids than staff. We probably had 5 to 10 kids at JMS, a couple at EDS down in Springville, very few there. KBS, we're not sure, but it's not a very big program, so probably similar to EDS. A lot of kids are just sick, but not COVID positive. And it looks like from what we've heard from our people that are doing the testing, the infections are not happening at school. They're getting it somewhere else, and then they test with us. We did not get board authorization this week to go virtual. We in JMS, our one program, we made it all online the last 3 days. And now that but here's why. It wasn't because kids of a threshold with students. This was because we didn't have enough staff to staff the school. And so we couldn't have kids come into school with nobody there, or not enough people there. And so the families were all really understanding, but this is probably another discussion for the board. In an emergency like that, I guess we should probably convene the board or something, or at least reach out to board leadership. We plan to be back in next week, but moving forward, who knows? So, and 2% threshold for us is like 3 kids. So, in some cases. So I'd like to just have a conversation and see what you think. You're the State Board of Education, so it might not be as easy as assembling a local Board of Education, but, and we're not doing it in the confines of the COVID law because it was more a staffing emergency. So Michelle, did you have a comment?
I did. I'm glad we're discussing this today because we've gotten word that Granite School District is going to go virtual, and then I've heard that possibly till Wednesday. That impacts us. So when we make decisions, it's not just about COVID. We also work with Granite. Our students attend and interact with Granite. So for example, our Mill Creek campus, our students are in the building. So it's going to, if they're not in session, then our students can't come. But then also my JMS campus interacts with Olympus and Evergreen. And so they're not going to be in session. So we have the decision to make: do we come, put them in different spaces in our building, and then join those classes from within JMS? Anyway, it's a complicated decision. It's not just COVID numbers. It's also staffing. It's also how we're interacting with the group. Also, we have a Wasatch Transportation that we work with, and that impacts them greatly. Of course, we always consider the students, but it also, these are people who aren't making, high-end salaries and are living what they can. And so that means they don't get any income while we're virtual. So I'm just letting you know, we have a decision coming for next week for the Salt Lake area because the Granite School District that we partner with is not going to be in person.
So the good news is we can go online and our families are very understanding, we're prepared, but I want to make sure that we do everything appropriately within the law and within the expectations of the board. And so the call we made this week was kind of like calling a snow day, but I'd like some instruction or input from the board on how we proceed on these things moving forward.
I don't have any hands yet from board members, but while they're thinking about their input, I just have a question for you. What do you suggest in the instance of the areas where you work or house closely with the local LEA, like with Washington and Granite? Do you feel that there should be sort of a carte blanche if they go virtual, those particular students in that campus are virtual, or do you feel that there should be always a separate decision because you can exist without, what they are providing?
Michelle.
So Chair Davis, that is the elephant that's in the room, because we usually go with what the district has done. If they don't have school that day, we don't have school that day, and we accommodate that way. Where they go, they're considering larger numbers and bigger numbers. And we've learned this, like this past week with JMS, that the students aren't as dutiful and attentive in their classes as they can be, obviously, when they're in person. I know it's a huge factor for Superintendent Patton because her students have trouble even seeing the screen. So, I mean, we're trying to consider if there's a balance that maybe we at least bring we could bring the teachers in and we just don't collaborate with those. But with the numbers that are rising so high, we could be making this decision overnight. And the next day we have, because once we hit 4, and the threshold is hit. And so it can happen very quickly for us, which is why we didn't have the chance to talk out to leadership. And plus we were having staffing shortages anyway.
Right, thank you. We have a couple of board members with hands up. Board Member Klein.
So Superintendent Coleman's comment on treating it like a snow day made me think a previous state that I used to live in where, you know, it's up in the snow belt, and they would typically work in 5 or 10 days each school year to the length of their school year so that they could take off any, you know, up to 10 days for snow days during the year, and it wouldn't throw anything off. It was just a snow day, and they knew that they had accounted for that already by just extending the school year 10 days, knowing that they were going to take up to 10 off. I don't know if that's something that could be done, something similar for these kind of situations where we have a spike in numbers of sickness, where, you know, the school reaches a certain level and then they just say, okay, the next 3 days or 4 days or whatever, we're taking off. And we just know that the school year, and if we go over those 10 days, then any days that are taken off beyond that, everybody knows will be tacked on to the end of the school year to make up for. I don't know if that helps. It's a thought.
Thank you. Board Member Hart.
One thing I'm concerned about when going online is meeting IEP requirements, IDEA requirements, and you know, not having interruption in services. Is that a concern for you all, or has that been mitigated in some way? I know some districts have written alternate, like digital IEP addendums for digital learning. Is that even possible? Is that a concern that you're weighing, or does that not apply?
It's definitely a concern, and as far as each student goes, we tackle that with each family, and we always make sure to compensate. And I guess my question was more, how do you want us to interact with the board when we make decisions, which may be different from day to day? Because it's not fair for me, not fair for us to ask you what we should do overall. That's the 15 board members shouldn't be expected to know that at this point. But really, how much do you want us to be interacting with you?
Cindy, you got IAG Quisenberry's hand raised.
Yes, I do. Go ahead, Brian.
Thank you. As far as kind of answering Superintendent Coleman's question just now, I don't have an answer for that, but as far as USDB going online, there is a procedure, and this came out, I believe, Thursday. So yesterday, Superintendent Dixon and the governor and the two legislative leaders signed a letter that allows for the schools to go temporarily virtual. And there is a requirement, though, that the school board, the governing board, approve that. And so the governing board here for the state, for the schools for the deaf and blind is USBE. And so to the extent this does happen again, I would recommend that the board, and there's no action item today, so it might be difficult to do it today, approve that and then ratify USDB going virtual this last week. It sounds very reasonable what happened and acceptable, but just to comply with that requirement in the statute, that would be something that we should consider.
And so, Brian, that's my and it's actually, if I read the letter correctly, it's for this next week or the following week. That was the time period designated in the governor's letter, right? And so theoretically, the board would have to call a meeting and notice it, even if it's an emergency meeting, and
That is
then
correct.
take a vote to allow us to do that. And then in the future, after that window, do we still have the same opportunity? Or I guess we cross that bridge when we come to it, right?
Yes, I would think so. You're right. January 17th to January 24th is the window of time. It looks like from that letter.
So would it be inappropriate for the board to make a motion and allow us that flexibility today when it has not been noticed? Would they have to call a separate meeting?
Yeah, I don't think we could do it today since it's not, no, Chair, if you don't
We don't
mind.
have an action item today.
Yeah, there's no action item. However, there is a board meeting scheduled next week, I believe.
So is it worse for the board not to have noticed it or for us to do it without the board's approval?
Let's go to Chair Huntsman because he'd like to weigh in and he could possibly answer that question.
I want to keep this all in the right space here on the informational item. A request for the board to take action on this particular issue or and actually I'm a little bit surprised that that this is being brought up the way that's being brought up. So I would first ask before, well, first of all, I think we have to notice a meeting and have a meeting. And prior to that, there's stakeholders involved in this that are the parents, the teachers, your educators, Joel, that's within your group, and there should be some kind of plan already in place. And so I would request those plans to go before my board in advance and say, and then in when these particular situations, how does this situation, where does that fit within the plan? And we put a plan, we add to it the existing plan, if there is one, I'm sure there is, to address this particular issue. And so in the sense of space on this is not the forum to discover, oh, we got to take some action right now. It would have been good to have it yesterday or the day before that or this morning, and then we would be preparing for that and notice and reacting to a meeting. So procedurally, that's what we would do. So we'd gather what you have, inform the board. They would look at strengths and weaknesses within the existing plan with a recommendation from you and your staff of how you want to operate. But then, of course, the board would take action with a 15-member, this 15-member board would take action. So we need to probably somehow do that quickly. But again, this isn't the forum to go through discovery.
Chair Huntsman, would it be appropriate for Superintendent Coleman and Superintendent Tanner and their staff to work on a suggested procedure and request of you to put that into an agenda? And I know we're covering a lot of different things on the 20th, but would there be an appropriate time to also include a small portion for a short USDB meeting?
As leadership, we would weigh it out to see if it can go that long. If it can't make it till that meeting, we have an emergency meeting. We have emergency meeting. We know how to do that, but we want to be prepared and do our best work. And again, I don't think this is a forum to debate and try to go through that discovery and move our best work forward. And then, of course, we can't take action. So that would be my request.
Chair Huntsman, if, for example, some of these campuses are virtual learning and USDB feels they need to fall in line with them, and that's coming up,
they're already falling
Tuesday.
in line. They're already falling in line with whatever happens on the campus. But
right. So what's the timeline you are kind of thinking of here?
The timeline I'm looking at today is Friday. I need to know how soon we need to react to give guidance to USDB and also there's a compliance piece to it, also in doing what's best for our kids. So I'm not ready to set a meeting until I know we can have a meeting and get those plans in place and get them to the board members with some proposed action. So time-wise, yesterday.
Okay,
So
Superintendent Tanner.
I just wanted to give some information because we have before us, because we didn't find out until I think it was about 9 o'clock that Granite District was going virtual. So then we have to take that information and make our decision. So that'll have to be made. It'd be nice if it was made today because our teachers are wondering what's happening next week. We weren't planning on going virtual, and then we got this information now from Granite. I should also share with you another piece when you think about convening the board. We're just talking right now about JMS. It will take one kid at one of Susan's campuses to take down. So if we have one kid that shows up at Blind North, then we'd come to convene to talk to you about that. Then if I have another kid that's in St. George, we'd convene to talk about that. So I just think just be aware of I just want you to be aware of how often that could pop up. So you're aware of how often you can call your board.
So
Huntsman.
then Vice Chair Davis, you're chairing the meeting. I think the urgency and everything of how and what, we've got to get a meeting. We've got to regroup and put timelines together. So this is not the meeting to do that. So I'm proposing as soon as this this portion of our meeting is complete, even if it's that I check off, Vice Chair Belknap, are you available to meet right after? I mean, we'll just miss our study session, and let's get with Superintendent Coleman and his leadership and put the scope of work together for our next board meeting to change policy or whatever we need to do. I see that
AAG
Quisenberry's hands raised, but I think that's the best way to do it. This is not.
One other consideration for you, just another option, is the Utah Open and Public Meetings Act allows for an urgent or emergency meeting and to disregard that 24-hour notice. And I've got that here. It says it can be, that notice requirement, the 24-hour notice requirement can be disregarded if because of unforeseen circumstance it is necessary for a public body to hold an emergency meeting and consider matters of an emergency or urgent nature. And we give the best notice we can, and then the board approves an emergency meeting and then conducts the action. So there is that option there for this board to consider.
Okay. Well, I think we stay on this agenda, and then I'll get with Vice Chair Belknap on the leadership side. We'll get with Lieutenant Coleman, if you're available. We'll try to figure out how we'll put a meeting together.
Yeah, I'm available. So I have, my next meeting is not until 4 o'clock. So
well, hopefully we don't cut into your next meeting.
No. And I think generally what we're going to look for in the in our request will be to get the board to authorize us to make the decision to go virtual within the next 2 weeks if we need to. Right?
Yes.
So however soon we can put together a meeting to vote on that motion, it would be very helpful, because then we'll have that tool. We actually don't have plans right now to call virtual school on Tuesday when people come back to school, but we don't know what news will break between now and then.
Okay. So
and are some of your co-campuses going to be virtual on Tuesday, or have they not announced yet?
Michelle, what did you hear from Mill Creek and Granite?
We just Granite, and that impacts all of the Salt Lake area that we have. We haven't heard from Washington yet or Ogden School District, which are the other two that we partner with.
But Granite will be out Tuesday.
Granite's the only one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Granite's the only one we know for sure of at this point.
Thank you. Chair Huntsman, your hand's still up. Do you have?
oh, it's down.
Okay.
I'm going to start trying to get this meeting together.
Sounds like we've got a plan for a meeting right now. As soon as you're done, Superintendent Coleman, updating us on the rest of the issues, and then we'll go ahead and move forward that way.
Okay, that's actually the end of my superintendent's report. I waited till the end, and board members, I apologize for just laying that on you, but when this information came to us this morning and you're already in meetings, I knew that I hate to put you in that position trying to figure things out on the fly, but anyway, so I apologize for that, but it was necessary. So that is the rest of our report today, unless Susan or Michelle have anything additional to add.
And I've got one more board member comment, but I'll just say we understand that the nature of the beast is really quickly and rapidly changing. Board member Hart.
That's exactly what I was going to say. What we're looking at is what every single board and every single school is dealing with, especially in the Wasatch Front. There's nothing to predict. I just hope that you consider making some contingency plans so that in the case of, because this is going to go on for a month, I believe. So I just, this can't be foreseen. This is the reality we're living in. So whatever we have to do, we'll do.
I'm actually quite confident with our leadership team, we'll be okay day to day. We face crazy challenges bigger than this, but my concern is compliance with the board's desires and with the law. And so that's what we'll work through here. So thank you very much. I appreciate your input.
Thank you. We appreciate all of you for participating today. And let me just ask a technical question. Do we need to exit this meeting? We are 15 minutes behind for our next meeting. Do we need to exit this and enter the new meeting, or can we stay on this meeting to continue into our study session?
You'll just stay on this, Vice Chair Davis.
Okay, well then we will go ahead and excuse those who are leaving. Thanks again for participating.
Thank you.
We will turn the time over to Assistant Superintendent Darren Nielsen.
Thank you, Chair Davis. I am happy to be with you today. Hopefully you can see my screen. Let me put it in presentation mode. It's nice to move from a urgent matter to a more long-term matter that we're going to discuss over the next, I assume, 45 minutes now, Chair Davis, instead of 60 minutes. We were allowed, unless you want to split overtime with this study session topic and the next.
We will split the amount of time, so you'll just be minus 7.5 minutes.
Okay, all right. Well, I want to thank board members Hart and Hutchings for allowing me to set the table, so to speak, for your discussion as a board about the school accountability redesign work. I'm looking forward today to listening to and to documenting your comments around this topic, as it'll help inform the work of both the advisory and executive committee going forward. This is just a high-level overview of how we plan to spend the time over the next 45 plus 7 minutes. I'll take just a few minutes. I think I have 5 slides around the background of the school accountability redesign work, and then board members Hart and Hutchings will take over the rest of the discussion around this topic. I just want to remind everyone, board members and those in the public who might be attending this meeting today, where this work started. Back on May 6th, 2021, the board approved this recommendation to create a holistic student-centered system of accountability and support. That document is found in Civic Clerk as an attachment. I brought it into this meeting so people wouldn't have to go dig back through that. And that provided the funding that allowed us to go to an RFP to hire a consultant or consultants to help facilitate the work. That process resulted in a partnership between KnowledgeWorks and the Center for Assessment in helping us go forward. I also want to remind the board and then also the public who's attending to this, just to acknowledge the Utah State Legislature has established and maintains authority for Utah's school accountability system, and they direct the State Board of Education to adopt rules to implement a statewide accountability system. So this redesign work that we've engaged in is a partnership between the Utah State Legislature and the Utah State Board of Education. And that's just this slide here. There's a reference to the statute that establishes that. So the purpose of the work, the current Utah school accountability system was established or redesigned, so to speak, in 2017. There were changes made at the legislative level that introduced some new components of the school accountability system. But even since then, advancements in Utah's Portrait of a Graduate and personalized compass-based learning created this increased need to consider redesigning Utah's school accountability system. In addition, the suspension of statewide assessments across not just Utah, but across our country in 2020 really highlighted what many people have felt for a long time, and that is an overdependency on a small number of assessments connected to the school accountability system. And I'm going to turn the time over to Board Member Hart to get into a little bit more detail about the way the work is proceeding.
Sure. So board, hold on to your seats. This will be a participatory study session. So there are some questions that we're going to be considering at the end. But the question that you need to consider first is how do you want to hold your child's school accountable? Meaning, right now, don't think about assessment. Don't think about tests or test scores. Think about how a school can be accountable to its constituents, students, its families, its parents, taxpayers. What measures, what things can a school, a district, a state provide as information for accountability purposes to measure school quality? So to answer this question, we have two committees, really. It's 3 groups total. On the screen are 2 committees. One is an executive committee, and in board backup, the actual individuals on these committees are listed. They come from the House, the Senate, the state board, the governor's office, and organizations such as USSA, USBA, and the charter board. Then there's an advisory committee. That is made up of 29 members, LEA leadership, assessment directors, school leadership, teachers, parents, and there's some overlap. Of course, many of those members have students in school as well, so they're parents as well. I was able to attend an advisory committee, and it is just astounding the level of knowledge and professionalism and expertise that is in that group. I think I know personally, I've worked with more than, I think I counted 12, and they're just amazing individuals. So we're in good hands with this. The third group is our stakeholders. And in addition to those 2 meetings, we're going to have stakeholder engagement activities around the state. Of course, COVID changes these plans a little bit, but the stakeholder survey is almost ready to go. Finishing touches on that. There will be virtual brainstorming and feedback sessions in March in different areas, and then in-person meetings in April. And that feedback will obviously go to the executive and advisory committees at different points, and we'll clearly use that feedback as we to guide our work. So the trajectory, how the timeline, the focus, you see that the executive committee input is really strong at the beginning and at the end. That work has already started. The Knowledge Works and Center for Assessment, they really are facilitators. They're not doing this work for us. They are guiding. They're herding cats, some may say, and really pushing us to think outside the box, consider the options, weigh the costs and the cost benefits. So executive committee at the beginning, executive committee at the end, and really the yeoman's work is of the advisory committee in the middle. And you can see how it starts out with a foundation and a theory of action and overall goals and big picture. And then each time it gets incrementally more specific. And it concludes with a report, but that report is an action report, not just, well, here's some interesting data. It's policy recommendations, which then, we will pass along and also use as we make decisions moving forward. So it's a really fascinating process. It's very painstaking. It's not anything that is rushed, and it's very thoughtful. I've been really impressed with KnowledgeWorks and Center for Assessment. The themes and problems, concerns that the advisory committee found, they were really concerned, as you can see, with actionable, timely, relevant information that can be used, the utility of the information coming out of the assessment system is critical. They want expanded indicators, again, not just assessment indicators, but indicators of quality. And it's important, as with all that we do, local agency and flexibility to meet the specific needs of communities, because our communities are so different. And this idea that, it's typically been very school focused, individual school focused, but what we know, a more nuanced look, a more complete picture, is that schools don't exist in a vacuum. They're part of LEAs, they're part of larger groups of schools, and they're part of the state. So we need to look not just at the school, because they are not always in control of all of the factors that they have, or their situation. They have, there is some responsibility on the part of districts and the state to look at individual schools in context. Of course, the executive committee was a little bit briefer, used fewer words, but basically said the same thing, that the uses and consequences, both intended and unintended, the idea of assessment as, or accountability as punishment, is certainly not where this group wants to go. In fact, very much wants to stay away from that antiquated and horrible notion that came from past times that we know is not effective. They want expanded systems, expanded indicators, and then there's an acknowledgement that assessment still needs to remain part of the system. The truth is that test scores do matter. A lot of times that's the first thing families are looking for when they're moving into the state and into communities. We do have a responsibility to share information about student academic achievement, but it needs to be in context within that, those expanded indicators. So these are some of the themes that emerged, but we're going to ask you for your ideas on some of the challenges and concerns at the end of this presentation.
Thanks. And to give you kind of an idea and start thinking about what we mean by expanding indicators, we want to look at a couple different documents that this board has helped create. First is Utah's Portrait of a Graduate, which we want to be able to, in our accountability system, to be able to measure the quality of schools as far as following Utah's Portrait of a Graduate. So this is a really good example that shows you, here's our, you're all familiar with, the elements of the Portrait of a Graduate, and pointing out that only one of these, only one component measured in the current system is, and that's the academic mastery, is really reflected in our current accountability system. And so there's a lot of other areas of Portrait of a Graduate that really within the system that we have right now, it's hard to measure. You can't find a way to be able to demonstrate how a school is doing in those other areas. And so as we talk about redesigning accountability and expanding indicators and measures, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about how do you demonstrate wellness? How do you demonstrate other things like creativity and innovation at a school? How do you demonstrate the quality of communication at the school? And that's the skills of communication that students are developing in a school in an accountability system. And so the next area also that we've been tasked to include is personalized competency-based learning. And so as schools are turning to personalizing the learning for students, there needs to be a way for the schools that are using this framework to be able to demonstrate the quality of their work. And it's always not always a fair indication in our current accountability system to show the progress in these areas. So think about, how does a school show how strong they are in their purpose and vision? How do you reflect that in an accountability system? How do you show that students are learning agency in an accountability system? And you can see some of the other areas that this is where we're really trying to stretch our own understanding of accountability and thinking out of the box and creating new ideas and ways to measure our schools' abilities to meet these frameworks and these ideas that we've given to schools and are encouraging them through our strategic plan and through the resources that we offer to schools as ways to improve student learning. How do we reflect that in an accountability system? How do schools, I think one of the challenges for schools that are trying to innovate and are trying to use Portrait of the Graduate and use PCBL is that it takes a while for the academic mastery to catch up sometimes. And so it looks like a school isn't doing as well when they're focusing on a multitude of areas and not just the academic mastery. And so it's just the academic mastery, it should definitely be a part of that. But there are also other indicators that we're really not looking at to see, to really show off some of the strengths and quality of the different schools around the state. So this is just a reminder, this is Utah's current dashboard for high school accountability. And you can see, I'm sure you're familiar with the different areas. We have achievement based on proficiency. We have growth. We also have English learner progress. We have post-secondary readiness, and that's for the high school specifically. There are also, we have allowed some self-reported indicators, which is a head start into this area of allowing schools that are doing innovative things and maybe want to show off some of these other additional areas that aren't covered within the statewide accountability, to be able to show off their progress and their strength in some of these other areas. So we have started in that direction, but we really want to have it be able to demonstrate specifically the elements of Portrait of a Graduate and PCBL in our statewide accountability system, and not have it be just kind of a one-off of my school is strong in this, but there's also that how parents use the accountability system is important to think about. To compare schools and for schools to be able to look at each other and know how they can learn from each other and how we can use the accountability system for school improvement. We want to give you an example from another state just to show you what is also going on outside of Utah. Another state that uses, this is a school culture dashboard. So they use a dashboard idea just like we do. But here they are attempting to measure some of those things that we're looking at adding in our accountability system. And they do it, I think, primarily through some different surveys of different stakeholders. And so you can see that they're attempting here to measure, for example, a sense of belonging and a sense of student safety. And how does the student value learning at the different schools? And then I went to the right side, but you can look on the left side. You know, there is an academic challenge, student emotional safety. How safe do students feel emotionally at school? And what's the student-teacher relationship like? Now, when you think about these things and you think about, you know, what do different stakeholders look for in a school, this opens the door for additional stakeholders to really have insight through the state's accountability system to see what the school's strengths are, and not just this a more narrow view of how does the school do academically. It really does expand for different stakeholders to look at the school accountability system and have a good idea if the school that they're looking at fills the needs that they're looking for. And so that's what we're hoping to do with Utah's accountability system. So we want to go on. We have just I think three main, probably, I think we're broken down into four, but three main questions we want to put out to discuss. And we thought it would be helpful just so we can make sure that, you know, this isn't just an exercise that we're going to walk through and then forget about. Is we've asked that staff would, as we discuss these questions, they're going to take notes, and we're going to bring these notes back to the executive committee. And I believe that Sybil actually shared, there's a web page for the advisory committee and the executive committee with all their resources. So there's a lot of reading that you can do if you want to really dig in deep on accountability systems and you know, what the, you know, cutting edge research is looking like and how COVID has affected accountability systems. There's a lot of really great research there. If you want to go into those web pages, it's the research that we've been asked to read as members of these committees. And we can also, we'll be adding some of this input from the board today in those resources so that those committees have an idea of some of what you have shared with us today. And they can keep it in mind as they're making the recommendations in this process. So the first discussion question is, how do you determine the quality of your children's or neighborhood school? So what is important to you when you look at a school that maybe you want to put your children or grandchildren in, or in your area? What are aspects that tell you this is a good school? I think this is where we're going to transition to taking notes.
Board Member Earl.
Yeah, and maybe this is going to come as a shock, but I actually do want the academic to be the top priority, not the social emotional learning, not the, you know, even with our portrait of a graduate, some of those things listed there, most of those things we do measure, governmental systems. Oh, I just had it up. I actually don't want the school to be measuring some of these other things. I feel like we're asking our teachers, we're asking our education system to do things that just really are beyond their capacity to do. So I'm trying to understand all of this as we're carrying on this narrative. I actually do want high academics. I want the assignments to be rigorous, and I want kids to be able to engage and to be able to read and to write and to do those things. So that is what I'm looking for.
Thank you. Board Member Booth.
I'm certainly highly interested in what's happening academically, but I'm perhaps more interested in school culture. How do the various stakeholders interact together, parents, teachers, administrators, children, how do they work together to ensure that the student has a sense of belonging, a sense of collaboration, is beginning to explore critical thinking, is learning to communicate, to be accountable, and is it a together proposition? Will I feel welcome jumping in and totally being all in this process of educating my child or my grandchild? And is that kind of enthusiasm and energy welcome in that school environment?
Thank you. Board Member Klein?
Yes, so quick statement and then a couple of questions. So this past year, U.S. Attorney General Garland came under fire for using his office to go after parents who oppose the teaching of critical race theory in their local schools. And as news stories covered that scandal, parents became aware of Attorney General Garland's son-in-law, who runs an online social emotional learning company that we're all aware of called Panorama Education, that is profiting off of measuring children's social emotional learning skills and commitment to concepts of critical race theory. So my two questions are, one, were you aware that Panorama Ed uses Portrait of a Graduate policy reforms to measure and hold schools accountable to critical race theory? And second, why would our board choose to move forward with school accountability pilots or support legislation that would help Panorama Ed with its national partners to measure and hold Utah schools accountable to social emotional learning and those critical race theory concepts that are coming through under Castle's new definition?
I'm not aware we're using Panorama in our accountability system as part of what they are talking about today. Board Member Hart, but I'll let you go ahead and address that.
Yeah, this is not at all a Panorama. That's not at all where we're going. In fact, I think clearly academic achievement, like I said, is terribly important. What we're trying to do is not rely on single standardized test measures to assess how schools are doing in that area. Our schools exist to educate students, clearly. In order to do that, and in order to be transparent to parents and others, we need to have a system that provides that information to parents. We need to be more transparent. We hear that loud and clear. So we have a responsibility to create a system that is transparent and does not rely on a single test score. So we need to do that. We need to create that system. And right now we're just brainstorming ways to convey the information that a wide variety of stakeholders want. But in no way, I need to be very clear, in no way is this are we going away from academic measures? That's the opposite of what we're doing. We're trying to get a better, more holistic picture. And to be very, very clear on that, KnowledgeWorks and Center for Assessment, they're providing no content. They are simply they have a lot of understanding of what's going on with assessment in different areas, in different parts of the country. They have deep knowledge of what Utah has done in the past, and they're simply really, truly herding cats, making sure that we're moving forward in our initiatives. So Stacy, did you want to address that anymore?
No, I think you addressed it very well. I would hope that in this discussion, what we really are hoping is to have some information to take back to these committees. And so if you want to answer this question by saying academics and nothing else, wonderful. We will communicate that. And that will definitely be part of the message that they receive from this, this study session. So I would like to be able to hear as many opinions as want to be shared in the short amount of time that we have, though. But I also want to also say, of course, academics is an essential and very important part of our accountability system. Nobody's saying that we should disregard it or minimize it at all. There are other stakeholders, and there are plenty of parents that when they look at a school, it's academics and does my struggling learner have an opportunity to progress even if they can't meet proficiency right now? There's just a lot more than academics, even though, again, academics is vital. And I think I think I'm safe to say we agree with that. So I would like to hear some other board ideas.
Can I just follow up with one short little thing before we move on? Knowledge works. I just want to be sure that whatever direction we're going, that this is locally driven, and that we're not taking our cues from groups like Panorama or Knowledge Works, who is deeply involved in helping us create our portrait of a graduate. This is just a quick quote from Knowledge Works. It says, "We have for far too long papered over the racist tendencies of our founders, leaders, structures, and history. The markers of systemic racism are abundant and throughout our history. It doesn't take long, even when reading the Constitution, to be confronted with systemic racism. We need to collectively change our education systems with justice and equity-driven practices." So just as a heads up where these other companies are coming from.
Thank you. And I think it's important to note, just so we're very clear about accurate information here, Knowledge Works in the facilitation of Portrait of a Graduate facilitated only logistics. They did not contribute content. I was on that committee as well as some other board members. And I think it's very important to say they had the RFP to facilitate the logistics, but all of the content came from Utah contributors. And that's very important to communicate accurately to our public. Board Member Norton.
Yes, in answering your question here of what would be important for the quality of school, I would say that we have to get right down to people's basic needs, and that would be physical safety. You know, it could be the world's most wonderful, academically challenging school, but if they've got lead paint or some other physical safety, you know, my child is not safe there, that would be, to me, the most important thing. But I also have a follow-up question. Could I ask that? It's housekeeping.
Yes, go ahead.
From the backup, it says on this sheet, click to drill down. On mine, I can't click anything to drill down, but I did have a question on, for instance, what exactly is value of learning? So is that something that people will be able to do, is click the box and then it would explain what each of these are a little bit more in depth?
Member Hutchings, I see you forward.
I think if you're talking, are you talking about the dashboard?
It's the one with the orange and yellow and green. I guess that's the dashboard.
Yeah, it actually, because we did see, you would click on that and it actually drills down and it would show you several survey questions that they had asked and what the answers were in order to get that score.
Okay, thank you.
And Board Member Hart, did you have an additional answer? Your hand?
No.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Straight.
Yes, thank you. So appreciate board members Hart and Hutchings and their presentation. It was exciting to see that. It's something I'm highly interested in and have been a part of in the past. So thank you for such a great job. When I look at this question, I have lots of things that come to mind. I value growth more than I value proficiency, although I value proficiency a lot. But what is the direction? What is the direction of the school? what is the culture? That was mentioned previously by someone. I want a school that provides feedback that is timely, that is actionable. And I think that's an area where we really need to make some improvement on our side to provide that feedback to students, effective feedback, supportive school leadership, supportive especially of teachers. I want efficacy with students. I want collaborative teacher efficacy. I want teachers working together for the good of the school. I want not just the teachers, I want the bus drivers, the cooks, the custodians, the aides, everyone in the school. They have found that quality schools, that it's just not the teachers, it's everyone, which goes to, I want high standards, but that goes back to growth and proficiency. I want a school that takes care of students' needs. I want Maslow before Bloom. I want Maslow to let's take care of students' needs so that they can then expand their learning and their growth in their learning environment. I want my student to come home happy because they have efficacy, because students are empowered. Let's see, is there anything else? Thank you. I'm a little excitable right now, but this discussion kind of livens me up a little bit. Thank you.
What we were hoping for.
I'm ready for like an amen, brother. Board Member Hymas.
Yeah, thank you. I know it was mentioned that brainstorming ideas, and so I wrote down a few thoughts to answer this question: how do we determine? And I don't know what exactly everything that is going on right now, but one of the things that I wonder, we talk about for academics, we have to go beyond testing, and I look at the overall culture. Do we have an idea of where people go post high school? Like, do we have a measure of that to say, yeah, this school, 80% of their kids go to the workforce or to school or trades, be it trade school, undergrad, whatever. Do we have those in place? I think that's a good indicator on what we are teaching our kids in high school about their ability to go into those areas and their confidence to do such. And so I think that's something to be considered. As well, Stacy and Molly, you talked about this school culture dashboard, it being an example. And we've seen many surveys on these kind of topics. I think it was on the previous slide, but academic challenge scale, student emotional safety scale, student teacher relationship scale, and more. Do we take into account what the school has done for those things? I know that school safety was brought up, and it depends on the age of the kid. Honestly, when we see a survey done, I know that in my school, sometimes those kids, if something happens in the room and it can become a joke real fast, and all of a sudden that survey is so skewed that you really don't know what's true and what's not. And so I wonder if we ought to look at if there's a way to look at what the school has done, right? So for example, if you said, well, the survey says that school is not very safe, but if you look on the information system and see that fights are very rare and bullying is only reported 1 or 2 times a year, that might give you a pretty good indicator that it's a pretty safe school. And so using more metrics or diving deeper than surveys, and then looking at what's happening when students leave school. I know that's for secondary, of course, or for high school graduation rates. I had one more, but it's gone now. So I'll turn the time over to somebody else.
We can come back to you. If you put your hand back up again, if you think of it. Booth.
Thank you. I wanted to just jump back to an experience that I had as member Straight was talking about everybody involved in the entire school culture, the lunch workers, all of the team members who make experiences happen for kids and ensure success. I remember a day when Mosi White, former USBA and NSBA president here in Utah, came to our local school district and brought all of those people together, the lunch workers, the bus drivers, the teachers, the parents, the front office staff, the students, and it went through an experience called Kids Count. Together, we brought out our best ideas, our best thinking in terms of how we help kids succeed. And that kind of an experience really brought everybody into the picture. And for a long time thereafter, in a given school, and particularly throughout the Nebo district, everybody felt such a buy-in in helping individual students discover their personal plan for success for life. I think the emphasis on academics is so important, but often that emphasis is only on numeracy and literacy and the things that are easily tested. But there are a lot of academic areas required for graduation in the sciences and the history and languages and arts and computers and business and everything else, CTE, that can also be measured in very quantifiable ways. And given our population and how many of them are going to spend their lives not as college students and whatever college experience leads them to, but in the trades and in so many other areas of endeavor, success and achievement is wrapped into a much larger picture. And we just need to find a way to assess and to encourage continued growth in all of these areas rather than being so specific to just a couple of subject content areas. Thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Moss. You're muted.
There we go. Sorry. Thank you both just for a great guide through this critical issue. And I'll just take my 2 cents and speak partly as a parent and as a lawyer, employer, et cetera. I look for depth of engagement and critical thinking, and to this balance that we're looking at between academics and your social and emotional issues. My students, or excuse me, my kids as students, I've seen have found their I think greatest sense of self-worth and esteem, and found themselves able to deal with some of the tough things that come at you as they have had teachers that help them dig deep, be challenged in their subject, whether it's math or art or dance. And some of my kids have had experience in each of those, but really to help challenge them and make them dig. And that covers to me a lot of both of those when we talk about the balance. So my dad's last piece of advice before he passed away when I was in college was a particular university professor that he said would really challenge me and make me think. And it was a professor named Chauncey Riddle. I don't know if you ever heard of him, but he gave me a lot of a foundation, both in thinking and also sense of worth and stability. So that's my thought. I look for teachers that really engage them and challenge them deeply. And the other balance there, I think, is one between, the teacher, we use the phrase now of the guide on the side and rather than the sage on the stage. And we have technology to help them. We've moved to a more constructivist pedagogy where the child is driven themselves. And I think there are some teachers that do that extremely well, and they still pass along the wisdom that they had. They interrogate, and I mean in a good way, interrogate, meaning the engagement with students. And I find some that I think are not as quality that tend to perhaps give them a device and let them go explore themselves. And I think getting that balance right is huge. If you know how to convey the wisdom and experience as a teacher, and some of that goes to
tiered instruction, et cetera, down to details. But as a general matter, if you know how to pass along what you know and interrogate and engage that student, and then also empower them to learn for themselves, but not simply just, send them off on their own. That to me is quality. So those are tough balances. I admire all of our fellow board members that actually do that work, and I get to watch as a parent. But as I've seen those that stand out to me, they've hit that balance in a way that really gets my kid engaged. So thanks for letting me throw my 2 cents in there.
Thank you. Board Member Cannon.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I recall redoing our dashboard for school accountability. And so we went in and we put in all of the things, the test scores and so on and so forth. But also there was an option for schools to take a moment to add something to their dashboard that was unique or particularly good about that school, so that hopefully schools wouldn't be just judged solely on test scores. And as I used that dashboard over a few years, I always checked there to see what had been put in terms of something unique about the school, something the school wanted us to know about them. And a lot of times schools didn't put anything in there, which made me sad because I would love to know about it. And one example I think of in particular, I didn't see this on the dashboard, but I know as we were working with Midvale Elementary and they were in turnaround, and they came back to us, they were getting out of turnaround, and they gave us background on all the community and private companies and organizations that had come forward to help and lift and support this school. It was just awe-inspiring. And so I don't know, maybe you want to require schools to put in something special and unique about what they're doing, something that is more than a test score, so that we can get a flavor for what's happening that's really good in so many of our schools. Thanks.
Thank you. Board Member Hanson.
Yeah, thanks. A lot of what I was going to say has been said, and probably better than I would have said it. But I think when I think about schools and their role with my kids, with the community, is first, I rely on schools, or we have, to help our kids and us working with our kids to define what success is for the child. And then after that happens, then to help them achieve that measure of success. So a child can't do that on their own. And if parents are helpful, then sometimes that results in a good goal for the child. Sometimes families need some coaching and help to know what's really possible for their kids, because it may be, I think we all want more for our kids than we have, but that may be more prevalent in some demographics in some parts of society. So those, I don't know how to measure that well, but there's an engagement factor. There's being comfortable, in the school factor, an environment factor. And then there's also a academic excellence, whatever that means for that child. So not helpful as far as being able to quantify, but that's the feeling that I'd like to get across.
Thank you.
Can I jump in here?
I'm actually going to just turn the time over. You've got 7 minutes, Board Member Hart, and I don't have any other hands.
Okay, so one thing I'd like to make clear is, I think by showing maybe what another state has done, what we meant by that was not the indicators. It was the ability to do, say, a dashboard or multiple indicators. We have no interest in somebody else's indicators. Quite frankly, almost every one of them has to do with surveys, and that is not necessarily at all where I personally wanted to go. It's just to show that there are different options. I have a couple questions. How many of you know how to access your child's school's fire drill reports that we're required to do? How many of you can find very quickly your child's mission or the minutes of your child's building leadership team, or the goals that your child's school has set for their faculty for the year? What we're looking at is trying to come up with a way to convey those less tangible things. And they may not be outputs, they may be inputs that are available to you to make an informed decision. We've got a lot of parents that feel like we make information hard to find, or we haven't done a very good job at making information available. And this is an honest and earnest effort at changing that. So I don't think we're going to be able to get to our other questions, but they are important. They're in backup if you'd like to see and think about those. But it's an important conversation that we have so that we can be very involved as we figure out what accountability means in this modern to schools and in this environment that we're in. We're at the very beginning stages of this work. It is not the work of any small group, it's the work of as many people as possible. So this was one opportunity that we wanted to take to enlarge and have those conversations. So that's kind of what I wanted to say. Stacy, did you have some final comments as well?
Yeah, just to wrap up, I want to say the most important thing about an accountability system to me is that it's something that we can, and it's been shared in some of our meetings, that it's something that we can use to improve our schools. And so academic scores, super important, vital. And we use that to improve our schools, but there are other components that contribute to the academic success of a school. And so if a school has the ability to drill down and know what those contributing factors are, then they can improve. Also, a parent can look at the academic scores and then see some of the other factors and say, look, at my child needs a school that's strong in academics, but also in these areas. And it gives the parents a lot more information of the overall flavor of the schools, of the strengths and the weaknesses of the schools. There are also schools that perform phenomenally academically, but there's a lot of stress and anxiety in the school. And there's a lot of poor culture going on that certain students would not thrive in that kind of environment. And so it's important to give this well-rounded look for parents and for schools so that they can make the best possible decision for their students as far as the school that their student will thrive in, but also for the schools to know, how can we improve? Okay, knowing that they're doing well or not in academics, super helpful, but to be able to drill down and say, you know what, in order to improve our academics, we need to work in this other very specific area so that the students in our school will be successful. That gives everyone the information we need to improve our schools. And that's really, for me, the most important part of this accountability, is so that parents know the best school for their student and schools know exactly what they need to do to improve and to give the best possible education to our students.
And as much as we want to report out, we also need to think differently about a dashboard and maybe consider ways that it can be a two-way conversation. We're really pushing the boundaries of and we really want to lead out, and Utah can. We also want to innovate and make space for schools that don't look like other schools, because we need all different types of schools and our parents want all types of different schools. So as we, include different, we have different schools, charter schools. There's talk of innovation, supporting innovation as we bring private schools into the mix in different ways, as we provide supports for homeschooling students. We need to make sure that we make space for all different ways of educating students, and it's going to look different. And it's not going to be able to be just copied and pasted from somewhere else. And it is going to have to come from Utah. It can't come from a think tank or a set of researchers at a university setting. So we really need your input, and we need the input of all of our constituents as well.
Thank you. We are out of time, but I did have a text from a member who said, if we have additional input we want to make, or we want to answer the two other questions we didn't get to, is it possible to have a survey sent to board members to be included so their input can be included? And I have some thoughts too, but we ran out of time, and I get it. That's part of the deal with this. I see board member Lear has some thoughts. So what are your thoughts about that? Can we be surveyed or include in some way in that?
Absolutely, as long as it follows open meeting rules and you're providing information. I know that both Stacy and I know he's been silent, but Chair Huntsman is on this committee as well. And who am I missing? Carol is on this committee as well. So, we need to hear. We need to hear from everyone. This can't be done this is not committee work. This is board work. So please, everything, Carol, Member Lear, Member Hutchins, myself, Member Huntsman, anybody. I mean, put it on social media for, just get us the information.
Carol, do you, since you are on this organizing group, do you want to say a quick final thought? And then I'm going to have Darren. I think Darren's going to answer our survey question.
My thought was I'm a little wary of surveys. I want to make sure in not from the board, not from the board providing input, but school surveys. I've often found that they represent 10% of the people, or we don't know how much of a percentage of the schools represented. So I truly care about school culture. I'm kind of in the Randy camp with, I think activities matter a ton and arts matter a ton, but I also don't want to hear about them from just 10 people in the school. So I'd like some more assurance that these metrics come from a important percentage of the school.
Thank you, board or Assistant Superintendent Nielsen.
Thank you. Yeah, to the question about ongoing opportunities for feedback from board members, the survey that we're going to release next week, likely on Wednesday.
Can you turn your
which will
camera
be open
off,
for
Darren?
a period of a month.
Darren,
sorry about that.
Can you
Is
start
that any
over?
better?
Yes, start over.
Okay. The survey that we're going to release next week, likely on Wednesday, on behalf of the board, related to getting feedback from our broad stakeholder groups, is one opportunity that any citizen in the state of Utah, including board members, could document and will have the opportunity to participate in. In addition, there'll be those public engagement meetings. Board members will be made aware of when those are, as well as you can promote that through your constituencies. And we'll broadcast that widely so citizens know of those opportunities to engage. And then the board obviously has the authority to request that this item be put on future agendas. You provided updates on the status of the work. And then the 4 board members who serve on the executive committee, your colleagues, is another that I would feel open to communicate with them regularly, and their voices in the room for the executive committee, and that can amplify your opinion through those mechanisms as well.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you. You all gave a super presentation. It was really interesting to listen to all the board member comments. And we are going to transition over now to our next agenda item for our study session. And Executive Davis, we are starting in 3 minutes later than I told you we would be starting in. So you have until 3:33 instead of 3:30.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And Kevin's going to put the presentation up there. He's driving for me today. I appreciate that. And I thought I'd just start with a quick introduction. I get to interact with some board members fairly frequently and others not so much. So just by way of introduction, Debbie Davis. I'm the Chief Audit Executive for the State Board of Education. I have now been at education since I initially came in January of 2014. And prior to that, I was at the state auditor's office. So I have just over 20 years of government auditing experience under my belt. If you ever want audit stories, catch me another time, and I'm always happy to share. Kevin, will you introduce yourself really quickly also, since you'll be participating in this presentation?
Yes, happy to do so, and a privilege to be with you today, board. My name is Kevin John. I'm the Deputy Audit Executive for the Internal Audit Department. Sorry, I'm clicking through a few screens there, trying to find the mute and unmute button. I'm not used to sharing my screen in these meetings. So anyways, I have approximately 20 years of experience in operations and auditing. The last 13 years, I've been with the state of Utah. And the last 6 of those 13 years, I've been with the State Board of Education in an internal audit role. So it's been a pleasure to serve you guys over the last 6 years, and I look forward to spending the next 35 minutes with you today.
Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate that. Just by way of introduction, the rest of our department, internal audit has 7.5 FTEs. So you can see Kevin and the couple auditors that work with him there, they do the majority of our audit work. My other director is Tammy Daly, and Barbie, our auditor, works with her, and they are currently tasked to the school fees consultation project. Over the next 6 months, they'll be transitioning back to audit work, and we're excited to have them return and help out with those audits. You're probably aware of my administrative assistant, Jen Tolman. She sends emails and meeting invites and is responsible for a lot of the refinement and polish on our materials that we put out. So we appreciate what Jen does. Then we've also recently added a hotline specialist position, and that is our half FTE, if you will. And Matt was introduced to you yesterday with the new employees. He's been with us since about October, and he's doing a phenomenal job for us. So what does internal audit do, and how does the public education hotline fit in with that? Well, we have a strategic plan, just as the board has a strategic plan. Our mission and vision, you can see, are listed there. The easy way to remember it is AEIOU and Y. So analyzing education independently and objectively for Utahns, and the why being, we want to support the board in your achievement of the board's strategic mission, which of course is advocating for resources, policy development, and then providing oversight and support. All of that we do through the lens of our core values, which you can see listed there: efficiency, excellence, life balance, professionalism, and integrity. All of those items, in addition to the 3 goals that we have listed there, are included in my and my staff's performance plans. So our goals are operational excellence, cultural excellence, and internal audit leadership. So what do we apply these things to? What are the things we're actually doing? Well, this next slide shows our 5 critical functions. And one of those functions is to administer or facilitate, maintain the public education hotline. And of course, that is our topic of discussion for today. I took the opportunity to go back and look at some of our documents and data and put together a timeline for you of some of the more significant stops along the way with the hotline. The hotline actually predates my coming to the State Board of Education. My predecessor kind of informally started the public education hotline as a best practice, which is a great idea. And so then when I became the director of internal audit, we decided, let's formalize it. We created a policy and a procedure. We pulled out the data and started tracking it separately. And then you can see over time, we've just enhanced that process. We've improved the process as we've gotten more experience and gotten better at it. So you can see that kind of culminates in the public education hotline is now statutorily required, right? And it requires a board rule to outline the process. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes, but there's a timeline for you with some of the big milestones for us with the public education hotline in internal audit. Before I completely leave the internal audit department and talk specifically about the public education hotline, there are just a few data points I wanted to call out. So how much time does internal audit actually spend on the hotline? We have 5 critical functions. The hotline is one of them. You can see it's actually pretty minimal. I have my staff track their time by category, including our critical functions. So it's easy for us to go pull this data. You can see we've been maintaining the past couple of years, and we're about on track this year at 4 to 5%, which is where we lie. So with our time, this is really interesting when you look at the next graph, which will show you the total number of hotlines by state fiscal year. You can see that they're increasing. And we'll talk about these data points a little bit more, these specific hotline ones, but you can see we're maintaining our time while hotlines are increasing. So we feel like we're achieving that core value of being efficient and being excellent. So that's kind of how we look at this. The next slide kind of puts those last 2 slides together in kind of a time and effort, looking at the ratio of hours to hotlines. So you can see that we've been able to maintain, right? We decreased our hours to hotlines ratio, and we're currently holding about 1.3 on the time it takes us, again, putting time and effort together for the hotline. Let's see, anything else I want to say there? No. So we feel pretty good about about the effort that we're expending with the public education hotline and the time we're taking. We feel we have a pretty efficient process, a consistent process that we're applying. So now let's talk specifically about the hotline. I mentioned it's statutorily required, and you can see there on the screen the specific statute that requires the hotline, right? An individual may bring a violation of Utah code or board rule to the attention of the state board in accordance with the process and rule. Well, the board's rule is R277123. And the board, it was just last November that this rule became effective. And it essentially codifies the process that we were using as a best practice. There were a couple of little tweaks, and we'll get into that as we discuss the process a little more. But really what the statute and the rule does is it outlines that the primary objective of the public education hotline is to allow individuals to bring concerns to the attention of the board, right? I don't know about any of you if you've ever called a hotline, but a couple of years ago, I actually had the opportunity to call a hotline. Not the education hotline, of course, but my family experienced a life-threatening medical situation. And once we were past the immediate and urgent situation that we were in, we recognized that there had been some violations of regulations. And because of our experience, we wanted to report it so that no one else would have to go through what we went through. Very similar to the public education hotline, where we encourage people, start local, start with your teacher, then work up to the principal, the district, the LEA, and then if you need to, come to the state if that's appropriate. So I started with the entity where we had the concern, and they listened to me, and they didn't do anything, and I was frustrated. My family was frustrated, and so it turns out we went to the state regulatory agency as well, and I contacted them with my concern, and they did an investigation and came back and found that, sure enough, there were some violations. And I don't know whatever happened, but I at least felt good about reporting and bringing it to their attention so they could improve. And I love that about the last conversation you had. It's all about improvement. Let's improve. Let's do the very best that we can. And I think the hotline helps with that. And in saying that, the hotline is the official with statute and the board rule, the hotline is the official venue to report concerns. That's not to say it's the only venue or method by which concerns in public education are identified, right? You as board members, you have constituents that contact you. I know the superintendency receives calls and emails with concerns. We have the UPAC process. We have special education dispute resolution. The state charter school board has a hotline. So there's a lot of different ways that concerns in public education may be identified. And it would be the risk management process is what would bring all of those together to really consider, okay, what things do we need to address in the public education system to improve as a system? But the hotline is the official and recognized method for bringing concerns to the board. Okay, I've asked Kevin if he would walk through our process. We've provided a flow chart and he's going to walk through that with you. So Kevin, you are up.
Thank you. So like Debbie mentioned, although it's not the only way people can report concerns, it is an important one. And let me tell you why I believe that. It's because it is a wonderful way to mitigate risk to the board, because you're providing an independent and objective venue where people, individuals, anyone can call and report a concern. So the thing about internal audit here is we apply the exact same process to every hotline. It doesn't matter who submits a hotline concern or necessarily even the gravity of it. We're going to take it and we're going to treat each of those hotline concerns with the same amount of care and consideration. So today, included within your materials, you should have received a flow chart that illustrates the process that is documented in internal audit's policy and procedure manual. So I'd like to spend, like Debbie mentioned, the next few minutes kind of walking through that process so that everyone will have a good understanding of what that process looks like, and any misconceptions hopefully can be erased in this process. Before I do, one word of caution. Please be mindful of the fact that it is a flow chart and it's trying to illustrate a very dynamic and non-linear process in kind of a linear way. So with that, there's clearly some limitations. So if my link works here, there we go. You should each have a copy of this. Hopefully you can see this well on the screen. But like I said, we'd like to take a few minutes and kind of walk through that. So first and foremost, internal audit has to receive a hotline call. And I say that not in jest, because we get a lot of calls or emails that come in that technically aren't hotlines. So we first and foremost have to decide whether or not it is a hotline call, or is this something that should be forwarded to the help desk or something of that nature. That process happens before we even enter into this flow chart. And it's important to be mindful of the fact that if we do get like a help desk question or a constituent feedback, it wouldn't go through this process, and therefore it wouldn't be logged in these databases either that we're about to talk to. So what we're going to go through is very specific to something that we've already determined to be a hotline concern. So once we've received that hotline, or let me clarify, there are a number of ways we can receive a hotline. I don't know how familiar everyone is, but on the State Board of Education's website, Internal Audit's webpage has a specific landing page dedicated towards the hotline. And on there, it explains a number of venues or ways that you can actually file a complaint with the State Board of Education. First and foremost, you can fill out the report of concern form. So that form is on Internal Audit's webpage, but there's links to that form on the board's landing page, on the contact page. So it's very prominent throughout USBE's website. I think USBE's done a very good job at making these contact methods very widely available and easy to find. Another way is you can submit a hotline concern via the email address. USBE's got a dedicated email. It's audit@schools.utah.gov, where anyone can submit an email. That email shows up directly in my inbox, in Debbie's inbox, and our hotline specialist inbox, a number of inboxes. So it makes sure that it is received, if not by one, by many. You can call our dedicated hotline. Again, on our website, our contact page, there's a hotline number that rings several phones at USBE, all within internal audit, to make sure, again, if someone is available, we can get that phone call. Now, not always is there someone available, unfortunately, but internal audit's policy is within 2 days, we'll try to get back to someone. So we usually recommend leave a message and we'll get back to you as quickly as we can, but you can anticipate that you'll hear from someone usually within a couple of days. You can, of course, mail a letter to internal audit at the USBE. That information is on our website as well. And the fifth way is you can set up an appointment and come and meet with us. You can even walk into the State Board of Education's building and attempt to meet with us. And if one of us is available, we'll certainly try to make that a priority so that we can meet and discuss that. So those are the 5 ways that we can receive hotline. And I actually should say there is even a 6th, and that is you could always call myself or Debbie or one of us directly as well. So with that in mind,
John,
yes.
before you switch to the next slide and the next item, I just need to let board members know, I just got a call from Chair Huntsman, and they are announcing right now a kind of an emergency meeting for 3:30, 3:33. And so if you were planning on skipping out right at 3:30, I'm hoping that we can at least keep a quorum here to meet the needs of our USD school. Thank you. Go ahead, John. Sorry for the interruption.
No, not a problem. Wonderful. Okay, wonderful. So we've determined we've got a hotline call. It's come in one of those 6 ways. So what's the first step? As you can see in the flow chart, is to consider whether or not this is a resubmission. If you remember, Debbie just recently talked about it. You recently passed it. R277123 subsection 4 outlines a very specific process and method to handle resubmissions. So that aside, we're going to focus, if this is a one-time hotline or the first time, we'll focus our efforts on that. So we would consider whether or not it's a resubmission. If it is, we would follow the process outlined in rule. Otherwise, what we're going to do is look at the method in which the hotline was received. So if it came in via a form or an email, we're going to create a hotline database record immediately. If it's a phone call or someone walked in, we're going to go through the process of filling out the forms and then going and creating a hotline database record. So internal audit maintains a database record. You can think of this more as a project management database than anything else. The intent of this database really is to ensure that hotlines are being tracked, monitored, and closed in a very timely manner. So it really is recording who came, when they came, and then, the process and the stage, the status of those. So we're working through that. Once we've created the record, we then make a determination as to whether or not internal audit has a conflict of interest. Now, this is specific to the individual, but again, this is part of ensuring and mitigating liability, ensuring accuracy and independence and mitigating liability against the board. So there's a quick realization of whether or not there's a conflict of interest. I can say that this is extremely rare. Education is very large. My social circle is very small. So the likelihood and implications of a conflict of interest are small, but you get the idea. We do a conflict of interest analysis to make sure, can we remain independent and objective? And if we can't, then it's reported to internal audit leadership, and in that case is reassigned to a different internal auditor so that we can maintain that objectivity and independence. So the next steps then relate to documenting the information that's received and then analyzing that information. So we create a project folder, we store the information that's provided, and then we begin the process of analyzing and looking at that information to determine what are our next steps. The next steps are really a series of questions to make sure we have the appropriate information, adequate information, and that it's being assigned to the appropriate person to resolve the solution. So as you can, if you're following the flow chart, you can see the first question is further information required, right? So if further information is required, we're going to request that information, and we're going to follow up to see if we get that information. Now, internal audit's policy on this is we will ask the complainant twice. We'll follow up with the complainant twice to try to get the necessary information to proceed. If it's not provided within 2 attempts, then we will update the hotline database to notify as much and then close the hotline. If that information is provided, then we'll reassess the conflict of interest and we'll cycle through that process, documenting the new information, analyzing that information, and determining, do we have the adequate information we need to move forward. Assuming we do at that point, then one of the questions we also ask is, who has jurisdiction over this issue? Does USBE have jurisdiction, or does another entity, or does it fall outside of the realm of public education completely? If USB doesn't have jurisdiction, then we refer that complaint to whomever does have jurisdiction, if we know. And this is usually done in collaboration with the complainant, if we know the complainant's information, right? If they're not anonymous. So we'll speak to them, we'll work with them, and then we'll make referrals as appropriate, say, for example, to the LEAs. If the USB does have jurisdictional authority, then the next question that we ask is, who within USBE should this hotline be referred to? Between external referrals and internal referrals, internal audit refers approximately 94% of all hotlines. So we're not spending a lot of time working or addressing issues or concerns. We spend the vast majority of our time trying to get the complainant in touch with someone who can actually resolve their problems. Now, there are a few cases where internal audit can be of assistance. We can look up a rule or regulation and then resolve that concern. That's demonstrated in the flowchart as well. Either way, whether it's referred or resolved, we then update the hotline database and then we close out that hotline. And that essentially is the process that we use with every hotline to make sure that people, their concerns and their issues are being addressed by the people who can potentially address them. So what I'd like to do for the next couple of minutes is just walk through a couple common scenarios related to maybe questions we've heard in the past about the hotline process. And then hopefully this will be the cherry on top of the ice cream that just seals the deal that this process is hopefully serving the purpose it was intended to do. So if you will, bear with me for a minute. We'll use an imaginary scenario that internal audit receives a complaint form. This is the form filled out online. It comes in and it alleges educator misconduct by a teacher. In this fictitious scenario, the allegation is anonymous and contains no specific details about the misconduct, right? So walking through this process, what would that look like? Well, one, we would consider, is it a hotline? Yes. Is it a resubmission? We'd go back to our database query to see, is there any way we can connect this to a previous allegation? In this case, there's no details. We'll proceed. It's a form. We'll create a record. We'll consider whether or not there's a conflict of interest as mentioned. Given the fact that there's no details, it would be hard to make a determination. Therefore, we would proceed. We'd create a record, like I mentioned, and we would document this nonetheless in the event that the complainant later came forward and had questions related to whether and what was done with this file, right? We want to be able to have an educated and well-informed discussion with the individual in the future if they chose not to be anonymous. So we would then ask, in this case, is further information required? In our scenario, the answer is clearly yes. We would attempt to request that information. Given the complainant chose to remain anonymous, there's no request possible. So is information provided? Clearly no. Multiple attempts are impossible. Therefore, we'll update the hotline database and we will close the hotline database. So as you can imagine, this type of hotline report is closed typically in a matter of minutes. From open to close, there's just not a lot of actionable data here. So these hotlines don't take a lot of time. They don't take a lot of resources. In the event the complainant were to call back in this case and say, hey, I submitted a complaint in the past, we would try to collect some information, date, time, form, manner. We'd go back to the database and we'd search it out. And if we were able to tie it to this anonymous complaint, we could then, like I said, have an informed conversation. The question then arises, would this be a resubmission? And clearly the answer to that is no. No action was taken in the first place. So what we could do is pick up from where we left off, but what we couldn't do, or what we wouldn't do, is consider this a resubmission. So that's one scenario. So we'll do another scenario and then we can wrap this up. So our second scenario will say the same thing. We received a report of concern form. It was anonymous still, but in this case, it contained a lot of details, very specific details related to who, what, where, when, how, related to this educator misconduct. So again, analyze whether or not it's a hotline. We know it is, so let's just jump quickly to we're going to create a record. We'll create a record. Is there a conflict of interest? Again, we'll assume no, because we rarely see it. We'll then begin the process of documenting this case in a file and start analyzing the information. Is further information required? The answer in this case is no. We're going to say they submitted adequate details for us to proceed. Does USB have jurisdictional authority? We would argue yes. Should the hotline be referred? We believe yes. To whom? In this case, we would argue UPAC, right? Your Utah Professional Practice Advisory Committee. We would make the referral as appropriate. And there's cases where we refer multiple. So maybe this is one where we feel like we want to get the LEA involved as well. But in a lot of these cases, we would refer it to UPAC. UPAC could then work with the LEA or whoever they felt appropriate, right? So we'd refer it to them. And then the expectation is that the Utah Professional Practices Advisory Committee would follow their policies, their processes, their procedures to proceed. We would then update the hotline database, noting the referral, and then we would close the hotline. So similar to the first process, even though we have more details here, there's a little bit more time. It still would be an extremely quick hotline call. We could get it to UPAC quickly. We could close the record for purposes of the hotline database, right? So hopefully walking through the flow chart and then a couple scenarios helps you better understand the process the internal audit uses in addressing hotlines that come in the USBE hotline page. Hopefully you see that the process is designed to accommodate and respond to essentially any type of scenario. And because of the currently designed process, internal audit is capable of responding typically by referring, like we mentioned, 96%, 94%, I mean, to concerns in an efficient and consistent manner. So a couple other points I want to make before I turn the time back over to Debbie, and that's just reminding you that given the multi-tiered governance in public education and given limited department resources, internal audit does not track what happens to hotlines once they're referred. We don't investigate them typically. Like I said, we only look at about 6% or only 6% retain are referred, and even those, a lot of those are just insufficient data, so they're retained because there's nowhere to send them. But so we refer them out, but we do not follow up to track resolution to see how the department handled it. There are cases where they report back, but it's usually not a requirement or requested. They're just doing that as a courtesy so that we have information as to what happened. So hopefully you can see that the process is efficient and effectively drives your constituents, the stakeholders of public education, to the individuals who are capable and have the authority to answer their questions. And that clearly is the objective and the intent of the hotline. And so with that, I'll turn the time back over to Debbie.
Thanks, Kevin. I appreciate that. So as you can see in the flow chart, and as Kevin mentioned, we create a record. And anytime a record is created in government, that kind of triggers applicability of the Government Records Access Management Act, right? GRAMA, we're all familiar with GRAMA, and the hotline is no different. And so on occasion, hotline information we do receive GRAMA requests for hotline information. In those cases, we work with our records officer here at the State Board of Education to make sure the records are classified appropriately. For example, if we're still researching a hotline, it's open. In that case, it's probably a protected record. Some of the hotlines we get, if there's a lot of information, there might be student protected information, right, that needs to be kept private or redacted. So just so you're aware, the hotline information is grammable, but we do work with the records officer just to make sure that we're handling it appropriately in every case, whatever that classification should be. So Kevin mentioned, as we go through this process and we're creating the record, we have this database, kind of a project management database for internal audit. We track several different data fields. Some of those fields would include how a hotline is received. Was it received by email, by phone, by the form? We track which staff in internal audit is assigned to the hotline. We track when we received the hotline, the complainant type. Was it a parent? Was it an employee? We also track who the concern is against. Was it a district? Was it a charter school? So a lot of different data fields that we have information on. Okay, so we have all this information. What do we do with it? Well, initially, and as showed on the timeline, right, the hotline has evolved over time, but initially we were tracking things in an annual database. We just, every year we just start over at number one, here we go. But after a couple of years, and we had a couple of years worth of data, we recognized hey, we can use some of this data for performance, for our strategic plan performance reporting. And then we'd have requests as well. Well, let's do some comparisons year to year. And we recognized that it was not very efficient to have a manual process where we were going and pulling data and having to open multiple documents to get information. And so we got savvy and said, let's just have a cumulative database. And that's what we have right now. Our current database goes back to 2017. And so we can go pull information back from 2017, clear up to 2022 today. And what that allows us to do is we've created this dashboard, and Kevin's going to kind of show you the dashboard. We provided a piece of the dashboard in the backup, so you'll kind of have an idea of some of the things, the data that we have, the charts, the things that we can show. But I did want to walk through this and just kind of show you kind of the versatility that we have, or if there's information that you'd like, with simple modifications, we can go pull data if we're tracking it. So the dashboard is split into two pieces, and what Kevin's showing you is kind of the first section. The first section you can see right there at the top where Kevin was hovering those are slicers, is what they're called. Slicers makes you think of pizza and dinner, right? So slicers at the top, and what you can do with a slicer is those are attached to the charts below. So we have all of these charts and graphs that we've established. And if you go up to the slicer and say, I would like this specific information, all of the charts and graphs will change. So for example, on SFY is state fiscal year. And if you click on 2019, say I want everything for 2019, all of the charts and graphs change, right? Oh, okay, we received 227 concerns. You can see our average closure time was 10 days. Wow, that took a lot of time for us to close things. Who did we refer to internally? That kind of information is, we can pull it. Well, what if I want to get a little more granular? So I go back up to my slicers, and it's, well, I just want the first quarter of 2019. So, okay, just the first quarter. Okay, we had 30, right? And we had some referrals to student support, to the state charter board. Anyway, you can just see, again, versatility, and we can quickly grab data if we have specific criteria that we're looking for. Other things, you can see the against type there. So in the slicers, sorry, Kevin, he's trying to read my mind as I'm saying things, right? But the against type, is it a district? Is it a charter? Is it, we're not sure who the LEA is. We know it's an LEA, but we're not sure which one. All that information is there on the dashboard, and we can quickly pivot and pull information. So that's the top part of the dashboard that we have. So if you go down to the bottom, and this is what we provided because it's data that we seem to get requests on more frequently, is state fiscal year comparisons. And we just keep this, it's kind of static, but every time we receive a hotline, our data updates. Well, we say, you save it, close it, reopen it, and then it will be reflected in the data. So state fiscal year comparisons, we just have a few different points that we've pulled. So the total number is listed there. So you can see where we are this year compared to last year. You can see permissions. Permissions is, was it anonymous? Was it confidential or public? We have breakouts by quarter. You can see the against type. Who is the concern against? Districts or charters. I think I did mention that the state charter school board has their own hotline. So there are things you have to factor in when you're looking at data to make sure that you're not skewing the picture, right? So some important things to consider there. The last couple things at the bottom, the action type, Kevin mentioned we refer a high number. We refer such a high number that it doesn't fit on our graph. So you can kind of see that it's filling off the chart there. We have so many referrals that we're making. But the information is there nonetheless, and it does paint a picture of what's happening with the hotline. So again, this part of the database, the dashboard is static, the information's there. We can quickly go pull it. So you're aware we frequently provide information on the hotline to the audit committee. We also include information on the hotline in our quarterly newsletter. When we send that out, we make sure that the board gets a copy of that newsletter so that you're aware as well, anything that we're providing. I will also say, related to data, sometimes it could change. Kevin gave the scenario where, well, what if we closed it, but then somebody came back and provided additional detail? Well, in providing additional detail, some of our fields could change, which means some of the data could change. So again, very important to have context to what we're looking at here as we're utilizing data. Okay, so I've given you kind of a general sense of the data that we've had, and there's just a few areas that I wanted to call out specifically. The first is just reiterating about that referral rate. We do refer a high percentage of concerns just because of that multi-tiered governance. And as I explained earlier, we want people to start local, start where they have the best shot of, I shouldn't say best shot, just start local where give the opportunity to resolve the concern at the earliest moment, whatever that is. If it's the teacher, if it's the principal, if it's the district, and it could be the state, because there's things the state has jurisdictional authority for. But that's what we're interested in, and that's why we're really trying to get people to the right place. So Kevin mentioned we refer to LEAs, to other sections at the State Board of Education. We often refer right back to the complainant and just provide them information. Hey, are you aware of this code, this law? Are you aware of this board rule? Are you aware of the UPAC complaint process? Just trying to facilitate and empower them to go after the resolution themselves, because it's very powerful, right? If you can have confidence in saying, okay, I understand something and I really want to work through it. And so we really like to educate as part of the hotline process. So when we make referrals, and Kevin mentioned it as well, it's important to note we're not tracking it after that. And so that concern then enters essentially a new process, a new system that internal audit doesn't have any say over, right? So UPAC has its process. Special education has a process for dispute resolution. Every LEA has a different process, for their grievances or complaints that they get. And so to understand, well, what happened to the concern, you really have to go to whoever the referred party is to get that information, because we simply don't have the resources to track that information. Okay, so that's referrals. Another data point I wanted to point out is, what if we get a call that's not related to public education? You might have seen up in the slicers, we have a non-public education entity. So we actually do track that information. And when I pulled this mid-December, you can see since 2017, we've received about 117 non-public education related concerns. We refer these, many of them are related to higher education or to private colleges or private educational entities. Not a lot we can do there. So again, we're referring back to the complainant. Hey, you're going to have to go somewhere else for help. Here's a couple things you might consider. But anyway, wanted you to be aware that we do have that information. So if we need to look at public education only as opposed to effort from internal audit, we have the ability to do that based on the data that we're tracking. Another data point, and we've mentioned it, so Kevin gave a couple of scenarios where the individual was anonymous. So we have three, we call them our permissions status, and you can see them there. So we have anonymous, confidential, and public. And you can see the percentages there. Public being they're not worried about anybody knowing their information. It could be shared, no worries there. About 50% of the concerns we receive are public status, as we call them. The next largest is confidential, about 35%. Confidential is when we have the individual's information, but they've requested we not share it with anybody. And then the last piece is the anonymous, and you can see 15 to 16% of individuals request anonymity, or they just don't provide information. Like Kevin said, we don't know their name, we don't know their phone number, we have no way to get a hold of them. So those would be anonymous. So you're aware, on our website, as we provide information about the hotline, and then as individuals call in, we definitely encourage people to share their contact information. It can be prohibitive to our analysis process, our evaluation process, not to be able to contact them. That first scenario that Kevin gave, where there's just insufficient data, there's nothing we can do, and we have no way to contact you, right? That's very limiting. So if they can at least give us their information and we can ask maybe a couple more questions, there's a much better chance that we can come to some kind of resolution or get them the help that they need by way of a referral or something like that, if they'll provide the information. So we do encourage that. It's on our website. We mention it when we talk to individuals, if possible, or if they provide an email, we can get back to them. So that's another data point. And then just a couple of others as we're winding down our time. And actually, before I leave that one, I did want to point out the number one reason individuals give for requesting confidentiality or anonymity is fear of retaliation. Fear of retaliation either for them personally or for their student. And having gone through my own personal hotline experience, I understand better now the fear of retaliation, where I was fearing there could be retaliation against the care that my family member might receive if I were to say something. I can understand when individuals call the hotline and request anonymity or confidentiality because they're worried, right? We love our families. We want them to be taken care of. You never want anyone to be harmed. So I understand the fear. Not that it's always legitimate, but I understand it. Okay, now the couple last data points I wanted to pull out. Just status. Status, is our hotlines open? Are they closed? Are they on hold? We track this kind of, again, as this is project management, and Kevin mentioned our policy to really turn things around in 2 days. The rule actually gives us 3 days, but we try for 2 to get things closed. And by closed, I mean for internal audit. This does not mean that if we send something to UPAC that it's closed within 2 days or 3 days. This is just the status for internal audit. But it's very helpful for us to know, kind of as a work list, these are open, I need to go, we need to follow up to ensure we're complying with our internal policy, right? We feel it's to be excellent, to be professional, we need to be responding to individuals in a timely manner. And then we also have, we're tracking closure time. You can see that we have average closure time there, and we've been able to bring that down significantly. It's in days, and the day, why we use days is because we track the day we receive a concern and the day we close it. And that allows us to generate this calculation that shows our average closure time. Again, closure means just for internal audit. And we don't, this isn't business days. This is just all the days in the week, all the time that it takes to close a hotline. So again, in understanding the data, it's even if it takes 4 days on average to close, that doesn't mean we're only working, that's the only thing we're working on for 4 days. Just that's the effort over that time period. There was some effort in there that took the time to close the hotline for internal audit. So we've provided a lot of information and we have just a few minutes left, and we wanted to open it up. Are there any questions about the hotline that we can answer for you?
Board members, you have 8 minutes for questions. Board member Earl.
I was going to just say, this is the kind of data we need, right? Coming from our schools so parents can see what's going on. I have a question, just even with UPAC, parents can either go through the audit or they can actually report right to UPAC. Is that accurate?
That is correct.
Okay. And then, well, oh no, I can't remember. I should write it down. Maybe I will.
So I can come back to you.
All right, thank you.
Board member Hymas.
Yeah, thank you. Just a curiosity, and the resolve is such a small percent compared to what's coming in. And I know you guys are doing such great work. What constitutes a resolution? Like, if we've done everything that we can and sent it on, is it not considered resolved? Or like, how do you get there? How do we up those percentages? Like I said, I know you guys are doing great, but if I were somebody outside looking at that, not knowing what your department does, and I said, well, you get, 200 we'll call it complaints, whatever they are, right? Submissions, and only like 5 of them are resolved, then how do we fix that? Or how do we look at that differently?
So I will attempt to explain this. So keep in mind, again, the database is a project management database. You wouldn't necessarily resolve a project. You would just complete it or close it. And so if you can see in internal audit's perspective, resolution in the sense of it's being closed or it's being completed is approximately 100% at this point. We have one on hold and one open at this point, according to the data. Resolution in this sense means that it's actually something that we looked at. So it's a very specific status, and it's defined in our data dictionary, essentially in the database, but it essentially means they came to us with a concern and we were able to resolve that immediately. So that's not to say that the other 94% weren't resolved as well. As we mentioned, they're referred to other departments and they may have very well been resolved, but that's just helping us identify how many started and ended with us, internal audit, as opposed to how many were referred out, and then were we able to. So in lieu of resolved, you could change that word to retained. Essentially, it would almost mean the same thing. 6% were retained, and with those, most of them were resolved. Some of them had insufficient data. We couldn't do anything with it, so they're closed. So yeah, that word doesn't necessarily mean resolved in the sense that their problems were solved. It just means that it was retained within internal audit, and that we were able to carry it throughout the entire process without having to refer it.
And if I may jump in with one other little tidbit on that. I just wanted to point out, of course, there's policy that's associated with this, right? Policy and resources. So given the resources that internal audit currently has and the number of hotlines that are coming in, we found that referral to whomever can resolve the concern, right? And whoever has that jurisdictional authority is the most effective. Now, if there was a policy decision that you wanted internal audit or some other, section or entity or whatever to actually do the investigation so that we're getting to the resolution of the concern that was brought, that would take additional resources. That would just be a different policy decision than what we're currently doing. And so is that an option? Sure, of course. Yes, absolutely. That's an option. It's just a recognition of what resources do we have with what we have going on right now that kind of led to the policy we currently have. So I just wanted to throw that out there for the board as well, if there's a change in how we wanted to approach this.
And so before we move on, I will say this chart I pulled back up, this average closure time, Member Hymas, to your point, I think earlier on when we first started this process, we were getting more involved in a lot of those cases, and it was taking more time. And as the process evolved over time and we started referring more, that's when you start to see these average closure times drop, because they're not staying with us throughout that time we're referring them. So.
Thank you. Board Member Earl, did you remember your follow-up?
Yeah, good work.
Thank you.
No, I don't. Sorry.
Okay. I see no other hands at this time. So we have 3 minutes to wrap up. CAE Davis or Director John, do you have any final words for us? And then we'll have Chair Hanselman come back in and start the new meeting.
Vice Chair Davis, maybe I'll just say in wrapping up, internal audit, we do take the hotline very seriously. It's a small percentage of time, but we want to do it well. We are definitely, or we feel, because we work directly for the board, we are representing the board and we want to represent well. So we feel as the process has been enhanced and improved over time, we're really striving for that, but we're also always welcome for feedback. So if you do have suggestions, if there's different data you'd like to see, if there's different dialogue you'd like to hear with the hotline, policy points you'd like to discuss, we're very open to that. But we do appreciate the support that we receive from the board, and the opportunity to represent you through the hotline. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
Great, thank you. I'm just appreciate your presentation and sharing the process with us. And so while we're waiting for Superintendent Coleman and Chair Huntsman, just a last quick question for you. The hotline predominantly is for if there's a fraudulent concern or an abuse of the law or a mistreatment of a person. It's not a place for us to direct people for opinions, correct? Like I don't like my child's teacher, so I'm sending in a hotline. But if the child's teacher did something, inappropriate or abusive, then it would be an important way to direct to the hotline, correct?
Correct. So based on what the statute says, if there's an alleged violation of Utah code or board rule, that's what would come in on the hotline. We do receive, and I think Kevin mentioned this, sometimes people will just share an opinion. We have a separate constituent feedback database where we're logging that, and we treat it, we send that to the board when we get those. So just, hey, be aware we got this feedback, but it's not treated the same. We don't handle it the same as we would a hotline. But you're absolutely correct. And I think a lot of times people just don't know where to go if they have an opinion, right? And so that educational process of, this is a hotline. If you have an opinion, contact your state board representative directly, or maybe it's your local board rep directly. So education is important, but you were absolutely correct, Vice Chair Davis.
Last quick question, since I don't see any other hands here and we're still waiting.
They're here.
It looks like they're here. Okay. I'll ask you offline another time.
Okay, thank you.
Chair Huntsman, I'll turn the time over to you. Thanks so much to our audit committee for a great presentation.
Oh, thank you. I did get to see part of this. I can't wait to catch up. While Vice Chair Belknap and myself were absent for a portion of your meeting, we were working with Superintendent Coleman and staff to react to a concern that was brought before us in our meeting. And so we have an awesome team, and we're prepared to give clear direction in form of motion regarding that particular concern of remote learning that was brought to our attention a few hours ago. So I know time is important, but first of all, just again want to thank the background on this. As you know, that the governor's office had released that letter. This is all surrounded around guidance that's around House Bill HB 1007, where it talked about remote learning and conditions of and how conditions will be set for that to happen. That letter went out last night, and we do have situations with Utah School for the Deaf and Blind that require us to react and prepare and do what's best for our students for the schools of deaf and blind. So we've prepared. There's actually three motions here to mitigate that. We haven't had a lot of time to get into discussion, push into a committee. This is an emergency meeting. And so I think what we'll just start off with before we get into this meeting is the very first motion. Vice Chair Belknap, are you ready to make that motion, please?
I am, Chair. I move that the board approve this emergency meeting under Utah Code 52-4-202 to consider action relating to USDB.
Okay, do we have somebody driving this that can put motions up on? So can everyone see those, or do you have
I think they can,
to...
plus they are also on Civic Clerk under the emergency meeting. All three motions are there. But if someone could post it, it might help those because it's kind of hard to toggle.
Okay. Is there a second to the motion?
Second, Board Member Booth.
Does the maker of the motion want to speak to the motion?
I do not.
Okay. The first motion before the board is that the board approve this emergency meeting under Utah Code 52-4-202 to consider action related to Utah Schools for the Deaf and Blind. Any discussion to the motion? My screen needs to change so I can seeing none, please vote. The voting is complete and the motion carries unanimously.
So Chair, do you want me to make motion to?
Yeah, will you make the second motion?
I will. I move that the board instruct USDB to follow the decision of the local school district when the local school district school where USDB students are located transitions to an in-person to remote learning. Boy, that didn't sound right, did it?
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, do you want to speak to the motion?
I do. For clarity on this one, this is when a school, when the USDB has a room inside of a school and that district goes remote, that they need to go remote as well. That would be this second motion. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Discussion to the motion, Member Hanson.
Now, Laura helped to clarify this, but I was thinking about the feeder schools where USDB is operating in, and there may be multiple districts that they interface with. And so I didn't know how that would affect USDB campus operations, but it sounds like this is we're just talking about their operations on school, in school grounds, on school campuses.
Yes,
Okay.
sir. Motion 2. Yep.
So USBE, excuse me, USDB would not be going remote just because the schools around them are going remote.
Yeah, it's
Separate
strictly the
decision.
students that are embedded in that local district or that, yeah,
Classroom.
the LEA, should say the LEA. There's motion 3 addresses the Utah Schools for Deaf and Blind 3 campuses, which is Ogden, Salt Lake, and Springville. So
Okay, I hadn't read ahead. Thank you. That helps
hey,
me.
that's right. Sorry, I knew you didn't. So this is coming as a surprise. So motion 2 is again, I'll state the motion again. Let's see if there's any other discussion. Motion number 2 is that that the board instruct USDB to follow the decision of a local school district when the local district school where USDB students are located transitions from in-person to remote learning.
Sorry, Chair, one more question. Is this
Okay.
time bound? Are we authorizing them this way for ever or for 6 months or for the rest of this year?
It's the term that, well, it's the time that the local district is out.
So Chair, could we add that the emergency delegation of this authority shall end on January 28th?
Without objection to the person that made the second. Gonna
No
drive or edit? Or I don't need to edit. I've got it. So without objection, the motion would read, I move that the board instruct USDB to follow decision of the local school district when the local district school where USDB students are located transitions from in-person to remote learning. This emergency delegation of authority shall end, no, this emergency, not delegation of authority, this emergency shall end January 28th. Okay, more questions on this motion. Member Hanson, your hand is still raised.
Oh, sorry, I thought I took it down. Nope, that answers my question. Thank you.
Okay, Member Lear.
I wonder if it goes without saying, or I wonder, it doesn't necessarily need to be part of the motion, but I think the USDB would need to be very sure that they independently notify their parents of that information. And again, I'm not trying to do their job for them, but I think that'd be really crucial, especially for these children. And then as to the date, couldn't we just say that it ends when the when the waiver ends, or when the governor says so, or something like that, so that we could allow that to continue until that permission goes away from whoever gives it.
Well, the challenge, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe Superintendent Dix can weigh in on this on the letter. I believe that January 28th is, if things are extended past that, then we'll be we'll be restating additional motions.
I don't have strong feelings about that part. It just seemed an easier way to deal with it, to not have to. I suspect this is going to go on for a couple more 2-week cycles, and I just thought we could leave it open-ended. But I'm more concerned about making sure that, and probably they're very conscientious, but these parents need to be crystal clear, and it could vary from school to school.
So
wrong button. We have to notify them anyway because we transport them data to school and home every day.
Great. If you transport every one of them, great. I'm just saying, I've been that working mom who didn't get the memo about school being closed. And my child didn't have disabilities. So I just think that's a really important communication concern.
Vice Chair Davis.
The motion doesn't appear specific to the pandemic or COVID. And if there's a snow day on January 29th, then are we trying to scramble for an emergency reconvening? I mean, I would think it would be wiser to leave the date off and allow for the flexibility and see how it goes through this winter, and then reevaluate after that.
So let's weigh into it. Let's see what Brian, is it okay to have that date off? I just don't want to come back and do this again next week.
Or the next.
AAG Quisenberry.
Chair, I think the intent of that, adding that January 28th date was as a sunset. And so you're asking if in motion 2, if we omit it, but if that's going to be legal, or is that what you're asking?
Well, the question is for this situation, is the date relevant?
The January 28th date, it's relevant only to the extent it coincides with the governor's letter. It comes out of the governor's letter.
So it's in alignment with the governor's letter.
So in that sense, maybe it's not critical to be in there because the governor's letter terminates or sunsets there on that date.
I don't have passion either way, Chair.
Yeah, I think we're fine either way. So you're the maker of the motion, Vice Chair Belknap, date on or date off?
So would my second be okay if we just take that last sentence off?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Okay. All right. So it's just going to be where it's back where it's at. So the motion, I'll restate what we're considering here, and that is with that date off. Member Hanson.
I'm sorry, I'll have to chime back in, but if we have an emergency authorization that we're doing now, somehow that's got to end, or else it continues until we go back and try to fix it. And that puts it on us to go back and revoke that emergency authority. So I don't care if it's the 28th or if it's the end of this school year, somehow this needs to sunset. I think it's irresponsible to just give an open-ended motion that says that they should do this unless we want to change policy. And if so, then we should change the policy somehow.
So you're making a motion?
You want to amend it to add?
I already tried to amend it and you pulled it back out. So I can try again to amend it. Or I can tell you that I can't vote for it this way.
I don't think we want to be here a couple hours on this. I
don't either. I just think if emergency authorization.
Let's leave the date on because it coincides with the governor's letter.
But it doesn't say anything about the governor's letter in that motion.
The end of the school year, Scott, maybe the end of the school year.
That's fine. Let's amend it to say that this authorization will expire at the end of the 2021-2022 school year.
Mr. Chair, can I make a comment?
Yes, Superintendent.
All of these motions are done within the context of the authorization that's been given by the governor, the Senate President, the Speaker of the House, and the State Superintendent. And so those deadlines are automatically applied to these motions.
But it doesn't say that in our motion, so that's another way to amend it. We can say as authorized by the governor's letter, and then I think that provides that deadline. That's all. I'm not trying to be a stickler. I just think it has to end if it's emergency authorization.
Board Member Hanson, why don't you propose an amendment here as
Okay,
you originally did with the
I'll
January
propose
28th.
another amendment then that just says that this emergency delegation of authority shall end at the termination of the authorization from the governor's letter, whatever that language is in the governor's letter.
Which is
Shall
isn't it
terminate
January 28th.
when shall terminate when the governor's emergency authorization expires.
Okay, we have a proposed amendment.
Second?
Do we have a second?
Yes.
Okay, any discussion to the proposed amendment? I'm switching screens so I can read it. I'm trying to. We'll see how this works. To the proposed amendment, Member Hart?
I was just gonna say, repeat the line. No, I have nothing.
Okay, the proposed amendment adds to the original motion where the original motion stated, I move that the board instruct USDB to follow the decision of a local school district when the local school district where USDB students are located transitions from in-person to remote learning. Then the amendment that we're voting on adds, this emergency delegation of authority shall terminate at the expiration of the time in the governor's January 13, 2022 letter. I'm not seeing any other questions or comments. Board members at this time, please vote. This is on the amendment. The voting is complete and the amendment passes. So the amended motion, do I need to restate it? Is there any other questions on this motion? Seeing none, well, I'll restate the motion, then we'll vote. The motion is that the board instruct USDB to follow the decisions of a local school district when the local district school where USDB students are located transitions from in-person to remote learning. This emergency delegation of authority shall terminate at the expiration of the time the governor's January 13, 2022 letter. Board members at this time, please vote. Voting is complete and the motion passes unanimously. Vice Chair Belknap.
Thank you. The third motion on the board is, I move that the board delegate to board leadership the authority to approve a request from USDB to allow a program on any of USDB's campuses, Ogden, Salt Lake, or Springville, to transition from in-person to remote learning up to 4 days and under the conditions outlined in the January 13th, 2022 letter from the governor's office. The triggering event for USDB to make this request is the risk of insufficient staff on any of these USDB campuses related to the spread of COVID-19 among students and/or staff. This emergency delegation of authority shall end January 28th.
Is there a second?
I'll second it. Member Booth.
Okay, you want to speak to the motion, Vice Chair Belknap?
Yes, just for clarity, this gives a little bit of nimbleness with guidance, and for also that board leadership would immediately let the board know that this is happening. And the reason we put transition programs is because sometimes you'll have two different programs near each other, but not within reach of the COVID or other illnesses. The other reason staff is on here is because sometimes they don't have enough staff to cover their classes, and they're very specialized staff, and even using all of their staff, they still can't teach these students in their classrooms. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, discussion to the motion, Member Earl.
I just want to make sure this one sentence is correct, and it may be the triggering event for USDB to make this request is the risk of insufficient staff on any of these campuses related to the spread of COVID. And then we say among students and or staff. So insufficient staff because of students. I guess I'm just trying to make sure that the sentence actually works. Does that make sense?
I'm going to reread it here.
I agree with Miss Jenny. It probably needs to say triggering event for USB. This request is for insufficient staff or test to stay protocols. What do you think, Brian?
Or just COVID protocols?
Any of those, I think are fine. You want to state the language that we need added? I'll type it in.
How about or COVID protocols related to students or staff? So after staff, I'm just thinking insufficient staff.
Not where it's highlighted, Brian. Insufficient staff, the line above.
Yeah.
Or
COVID, I don't know, COVID
Let's
protocol.
take a minute to look at it one more
Okay.
time and then.
Oh, one more time.
Chair Husband, I don't have the ability to raise my hand while sharing screen. Do you mind if I speak?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I think the language was trying to mirror what is actually in the allowance of the letter. So you could just put a period after COVID-19.
Okay.
Because the letter is in relation to that event and there's some guardrails around it. So you could just say triggering event for USDB to make this request is the risk of insufficient staff on any of these USDB campuses related to the spread of COVID-19. Might not be the right order, but I think that's enough content.
But it's not just staff.
It could be the student, right?
It could be students as well.
The student, yeah, threshold or whatever.
So you could change the risk then, if it's about the spread or if it's about insufficient staff. I just think we've got it kind of muddled in there. You're absolutely right. They're kind of two different risks, not enough staff and then the risk of spread.
All right, cool.
Okay, that makes more sense.
Yeah,
now.
that makes more, thank you for that catch.
Thank you.
We had it in our brain, but didn't do it clear as we read this out. Member Hart?
I'm trying to think. It has to do with that sentence. I don't know. It's kind of splitting hairs, but it may not. I think that the event is the threshold that triggers test to stay and the inability to do test to stay. So I think it's more specific and more accurate to say the risk of insufficient staff, or, well, I guess maybe it's fine. At first, my concern was that insufficient staff could be this other virus that's, we don't need a COVID positive to be without staff in this situation either. So I was just, but I'm taking my hand up.
Yeah, it's all staying within the guidelines of the governor's letter.
I'm good.
Member Norton? Oh, you're muted.
I just have a question about it's not even a suggestion, it's just a question about the campuses. For instance, if there was a problem at Mill Creek, does this mean that they would be closing all the campuses down? Where it says on any of the USDB campuses?
The second motion made addresses Mill Creek. Is that correct, Superintendent Coleman?
Yes, and the wording just allows you to approve a request, no matter what that is. We would not request multiple campuses if we only had a problem on one.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good question. Let me restate the motion. And then, let me restate the motion and we'll vote. The motion before the board is that the board delegate to board leadership the authority to approve a request from USDB to allow a program of any of USDB's campuses, Ogden, Salt Lake, or Springville, to transition from in-person to remote learning up to 4 days and under the conditions outlined in the January 13, 2022 letter from the governor's office. The triggering event for USDB to make this request is the risk of insufficient staff or the spread of COVID-19 on any of these USDB campuses. This emergency delegation of authority shall end on January 28th. Board members at this time, please vote. The voting is complete and the motion passes unanimously. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, can I make one quick comment before we wrap it up?
You bet. Superintendent
Thank
Coleman.
you. Yeah, board members, I was notified that one of my comments earlier today was a matter of concern for several board members, where I informed you that we shut down one of our programs in Salt Lake for 3 days this week. I just wanted to let you know that we did that before this letter came out with these instructions and limitations. We did it the way we would have done on a snow day, and because of the necessity of not being able to have enough staff there. And so I hope that didn't alarm any of you, and I apologize if I did that. In the future, of course, going forward, now we know what to do. So thank you for your support.
Okay. And thank you, board members, for staying longer today and being a part of this emergency meeting. And thanks to staff and Superintendent Coleman and your staff for bringing the concern to our attention and also working on the proposed motions. I know compliance to the state's really important, and also the transparency, and that's for all of our parents and stakeholders is important also. So thank you for your actions, quick actions today. This concludes our emergency meeting. Again, thank you and take care, and we'll keep you posted on the activities of, hopefully there's not a lot to keep you posted on in this space of the motions that you have passed today, but we'll do that as this rolls out. Thank you. Take care and be safe and have an awesome weekend.